Hey everybody, Mr. Safko here, and what I'm here to kind of chat with you a little bit about is popular religion in the Middle Ages. So this is designed to go with center number 5 of the center work that we're doing around the Middle Ages, art, architecture, and religion. To get started, you're going to need the worksheet. You're going to need 12 colored pencils, so go ahead and make sure that you have those. You're also going to need a highlighter and a pen or a pencil. If you need to get up and get those materials, please feel free to pause the video and go ahead and do that. So the first section here of this center is kind of talking about some very important concepts and vocabulary that we're going to be using around Middle Ages religion. And the very first section here has some fill in the blanks for you about religion. So the first sentence here says, the accounts provided in the Bible blank provide a clear expectation of how to worship. And go ahead and write in the blank there, did not. D-I-D-N-O-T. The accounts provided in the Bible, most specifically the Gospels, did not provide a very clear account of how Christians ought to worship. And so what happens, and this is the second part of that fill-in, blank developed to provide guidance in how to worship. That word is tradition. T-R-A-D-I-T-I-O-N. So tradition develops to help people decide how to worship. So what's going to happen throughout the Middle Ages as Christianity grows, they're going to develop a number of different traditions to worship. So what will happen when we get a little bit further in this semester to the Reformation is that people will start to question these traditions and why we do what we do. And then let's move down to the second sentence there, which is one of the big differences between medieval Christianity and Christianity today is that Christianity today provides people with comfort, C-O-M-F-O-R-T, comfort, while medieval Christianity was based around fear, F-E-A-R. So one of the things today, especially in modern Christianity, is that when somebody passes away, we will often say something like, they are in a better place, that they're with God, etc., etc. In the Middle Ages, they're not so sure. They believe that they are more sinful, and the chances of them being saved are small. So there's a lot of fear, and you'll kind of see that as we go through some of the art and some of the architecture, when we look at gargoyles and a number of other things, that fear is a big part of this motivation and around religion. Now, we're going to move down to the vocabulary section, and as you can see, there's a table there. On the left is a vocabulary word. On the right is the definition. This is when you're going to need the colored pencils that I told you about. So what you're going to do, you're going to take one colored pencil and go ahead and color in relic. And then as I'm talking to you, one of the definitions there will match relic. Go ahead and color that definition. So if you color the word relic red, you're going to want to color the definition that goes with relic red so that you know those two definitions go together because they are not in order there. Let me repeat that. The definitions are not in order, so you need to make sure that you follow along and color in relic and then color in the proper definition. So we'll go ahead and get started with the first word there, which is relic. Relics are physical remains or the personal effects of a saint. Relics are very important in understanding medieval Christianity. They believe in saints. They believe that saints perform miracles. This is some of the, you can see we're going to get into some of this other vocab. But the relic itself is something, it can be a physical part of the body. So, for example, you might have St. Paul's finger. So the bone finger that they believe is part of St. Paul. Or it could be a hanky, it could be a towel, it could be anything that that saint touched. Why this is important is this is the reason cathedrals and churches get their names. So often if you go to St. Paul's Cathedral, that means somewhere probably there is a reliquary, which is this fancy box to hold the relic, and That's how they name these churches. These relics become important too for miracles. So often people will believe that if they touch or interact with this relic, that it could heal them or it could bring them what they wished. The second vocabulary word there is pilgrimage, and that has to do with travel. And what it has to do with is when somebody takes travel or wants to travel as part of their spiritual life. It's a religious journey taken for a spiritual motive, usually to a religious shrine. In medieval Christianity, they are very often to cathedrals to be able to interact with these relics. One of the most famous works of medieval literature, the Canterbury Tales, is actually all about this. The premise of the work is that we've got a number of people who are going to they're on a pilgrimage to the Cathedral of St. James de Compostela, which is in modern-day Spain. So this idea of pilgrimage, traveling for religious reasons, is very important. When we get to Islam in a couple of weeks here, pilgrimage is also going to be important to them too. So make sure you keep that vocabulary word in your mind. The next one is original sin. And original sin is something that develops in the early Middle Ages. And it's the idea that all human beings are sinful and born with sin because of Adam and Eve. So why is this important? Well, it's important because it means that humans are by nature evil and therefore need the church to be able to restore their relationship with the divine. And so it leads to very strange things like, if you remember last week, we were talking about that it's not unusual for children to not survive very long. So very often, if a woman is giving birth, the priest will be there to be able to bless the baby or provide baptism because they believe that even a baby, as soon as it's born, has this original sin. This is going to be a very big idea in medieval Christianity, and is kind of strange to us today, but it shows the necessity of the church, right? Because without the church, humans would carry this original sin and not be able to enter paradise. So that's our next one there. The next word is the word miracle, M-I-R-A-C-L-E. And miracles, I think you guys should probably know what some of them are, but it's the idea that something can happen that is inexplicable. So it's something wonderful and marvelous, not easily explained by nature. We use it every day, so sometimes you might say, boy, we were having a party and it stopped raining right before the party, and that's a miracle. Or I passed my math test even though I didn't think I would, and that's a miracle. To medieval Christians, the idea of miracle is tied to saints, and it's tied to the idea that these saints are so holy that their body parts, so as we talked about the relics, can perform miracles. So someone who is very ill might get touched by St. Paul's bone finger and suddenly be healed. This is something that they believe, and that these miracles can happen, and they're not easily explained. Our next word is a challenging one. It's hagiography, H-A-G-I-O-G-R-A-P-H-Y. And hagiography is the writing that's done of saints' lives. So it's a very popular form of literature in the Middle Ages. And the idea is that people started to collect these stories and tell them as a way of conversion. So people will talk about the stories that go with the relics, and that is called hagiography. The next word down is martyr, M-A-R-T-Y-R, and that is anybody that dies for their religious beliefs. So someone who is killed because of their religious beliefs. So many of the early saints are martyrs. People like Saint Sebastian or Saint Ursula are considered martyrs, especially before Christianity was officially allowed to be practiced in the Roman Empire. There were many people who were became martyrs because they believed in Christianity. Our next word there is saint, which I'm sure kind of from our conversation here, you're already starting to believe or starting to know what it means. And it's someone who is considered close to God, right? And in the medieval way, it means that people who are so close to God that they can intercess, they can pray on behalf of. We talked about relics; those all come from saints. They're believed to have been so holy that they can, they're believed to be closer to God than most. And as we kind of talked about, often the relics of these people are considered to have performed miracles either while they were alive or with their relics after death. Monastery. So like we were talking about, the idea that tradition kind of grows up and of how one ought to practice Christianity. The thing that starts to develop is a monastery. And this is a place where people can live very simple lives and to dedicate their lives to God. So one of the first people to really get this going is St. Anthony. There was a man named St. Benedict who writes rules for how monasteries ought to run. And the idea is that men and women come here and dedicate their lives entirely to God. It starts with prayer. As we move through the Middle Ages, monasteries are going to do things like farm. They're going to do things like take care of people. They're going to play a role in the Crusades, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. But the idea is that they're places where people can live simply to dedicate their lives to God. The next vocab word is heresy, H-E-R-E-S-Y, and that's the idea that something does not match what is officially taught by the church. When we get to Martin Luther and the Reformation, he's going to be considered, his ideas will be heresy. He himself will be a heretic. Throughout the Middle Ages, this happens. So people will start to have ideas that don't match what the church teaches, and it will be heresy. It's not a good thing. And very often people will be burnt at the stake, or a number of other not so nice things will happen to those who do not, who have beliefs that do not match what the church officially teaches. Mass. Mass is the form of worship most commonly used during the Middle Ages and during medieval Christianity. It's where folks receive communion, so that's pretty important. Prayer for the dead. This is the idea that's especially popular in the Middle Ages, where it is believed that prayers said in this world and things done in this world can influence the soul of those who have already passed away. So it's very common for people to pay money to have those at a monastery pray for the soul of someone who has already passed away. Our final word here is purgatory, P-U-R-G-A-T-O-R-Y. And purgatory is a concept that the Middle Ages develops over time, which is what happens when someone dies who isn't quite evil enough to be condemned, but probably isn't religious enough to go directly into heaven. And the idea is that there's this thing called purgatory, and souls can exist there for a number of years. And again, if we're talking about eternity, the number of years could be something like 10,000 years, 12,000 years. And that a soul, as it's sitting in purgatory, can purify to get ready to enter into heaven. Purgatory is really important because as we move through the Crusades and we move through some of the other things we're going to talk about, there are a number of practices that are designed to decrease the number of years that a soul has to spend in purgatory. So it could be everything from viewing a relic to indulgences, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks here. But that's a really important vocabulary word. If you missed anything, feel free to review this video. I go through all the definitions. Also, feel free to compare notes with the other people that are at your station right now. You're going to finish this station up by doing section 2. Section 2 is going to ask you to use the vocabulary words that we just reviewed and write 3 original complete sentences using those vocabulary words. This is where you'll use the highlighter, because go ahead and highlight the vocabulary word in your sentence so I can find it a little bit easier. Please make sure you use sentences that show you know the vocabulary. So don't say something like, heresy is a word that I learned in social studies class. that doesn't show me that you know what the word heresy means. So make sure you use good sentences. If you still have some time left over, go ahead and take the challenge section, which is for you to go ahead and read a little bit online about the lives of some of the medieval saints. And I think you might find that interesting. Excellent. Well, I hope you enjoyed this center, and I look forward to continuing our conversation of the Middle Ages.